When it comes to the topic of diet and nutrition, there's probably more disagreement and lack of consensus these days than at any point in the history of our species. There are just so many options available to us nowadays and so many differing opinions on how we should be feeding ourselves. But there's one thing that almost all successful dietary strategies and all major detox protocols can agree on, and that is that for optimizing human health, this one substance should be cut out of the human diet. Now, most people are familiar with this and they've heard it at one point or another. See, this substance has been linked to everything from low energy and lack of mental clarity to obesity, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, and dementia, and a host of autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis. And yet, people in modern industrialized countries like the United States continue to regularly consume somewhere around 3 times the recommended daily dose of this substance. So this week, I brought in an expert to talk about why it's so hard to kick this habit and what we can all do to make 2023 our healthiest year ever. Let's get into this. Welcome everyone. I've got an awesome guest for you today. Mike Collins is the founder of sugaraddiction.com, and he's got some awesome information for you on how certain dietary changes can make all the difference in your health status going into 2023. Welcome, Mike Collins.
Thanks, Yoni. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm honored.
I'm stoked to have you on here, Mike. And one of the things that I wanted to kick this off with was what led you to become sugar-free initially, and how long have you been at this?
No, it's a good question. It goes back a couple generations, honestly. So kind of a weird story, but my grandmother died when my mother was only 8 years old. And what happened was my grandfather had to move in with his sister, but they owned this country store across the way, the family did. So my grandfather made a deal with his cousin Jim at the time that anytime my mom walked into that store, she could have any candy she wanted, just put it on his tab. And that literally, I mean, a wonderful thing to do for an 8-year-old just lost her mom, but that set up a lifestyle, a life. My mother really genuinely believed that sugar was love. And that's how we were raised. That's how we grew up. I mean, cookies, candy, we had unfettered access to the sugar. Imagine a child able to put as much sugar on his Cheerios or his cornflakes and never have their parents say anything, right? Wow. So we would literally scrape off half an inch, quarter of an inch of sugar with the milk at the end, and Kool-Aid with 3 times the recipe. Instead of 1 cup of sugar, it was 3 cups of sugar, and bread and butter and sugar sandwiches. It was crazy. And that's how I grew up. Candy. My mother had a stash. We just always eating candy and cookies and cake and soda and everything. So fast forward, that's how I grew up. I ran into beer at about 14 or 15. And here's probably the key for the folks is that I knew that beer changed my state. I knew how it changed how I felt, because I was kind of shy and I could go to drink behind the high school and go to the dance and talk to the girls. Well, that party lasted till I was about 28 years old and I got sober. So after I got sober, I really wanted to get healthy. And I can talk about that if you want, but, and I really wanted to get healthy. So I read this book called Sugar Blues. And honest to God, I don't know what happened to me. It just got in my brain about sugar. And I just enjoyed the book so much and I enjoyed the idea so much. And at the time, I was really using sugar compulsively. I'm a thin, athletic guy, gained like 20 pounds, acne on my face, rosacea on my face. It was just really, I was sluggish, and I was drinking Mountain Dews, 16-ounce, 8 of them a day. Whoa. Like literally, they called me the Mountain Dew man at the store. And it was just crazy. And I found all my friends in recovery were doing the same thing. They were gaining a lot of weight. So I just kind of studied it. And just about 3 years later, I quit sugar completely, sugar, flour, and caffeine. And I ended up raising a couple of sugar-free kids. Somehow I talked my wife at the time into having kids, no sugar, no flour, no caffeine, in the womb. And it lasted till they were about 6 years old. And then we kind of slipped, but we regained our our resolve, I guess. And then literally for their entire childhood, they only had sugar at those outside birthday parties, never at home. And so, and then, the kids grew up kind of different. Obviously, we were fighting against the grandparents in the Montessori school and their friends' parents. They thought we were literally depriving these kids of a childhood, right? And it really just wasn't true. And they'll tell you today that's not true. But anyway, they said I should write a book. So I did that in 2018, and it did well on Amazon. But then really I was kind of semi-retired, and about 5 years ago, well, first of all, I grabbed sugaraddiction.com, the domain name, and started giving out the best information on the planet. But no one really did anything. They could just, it wasn't really working, I guess. People didn't want just information. They could get that from Google. But about 5 years ago, when I kind of went full time coaching and having these meetings, support groups online, it just kind of took off. And then the pandemic just put it into hyperdrive. But first, what happened during the pandemic. Everybody was comfort eating and everybody was looking for a solution. So, and that kind of brings us up to today. It's kind of the short podcast version, but usually brings up more questions than it answers.
Yeah, you had been raised with this psychological model where sweet foods were representative of love and caring. And
Yes.
and that was just what was normal for you. And then there was a struggle with alcohol. And as you were coming off of the alcohol, you leaned back on what you knew, which was more sugar. Is that?
That's exactly correct. And that happens with a lot of recovering people. And that's exactly correct. That's
Sure.
exactly.
So they talk about all the time when you're quitting a habit, it works best to replace it with something else. So would you say that you replaced it with sugar? You just kind of went back to what you
Oh,
knew?
absolutely. I did. I went back to sugar.
Yeah.
I view sugar as like you said, I view sugar as the gateway, the original gateway drug. It's unconsciously we're using it to manage our emotions, similar to people who use drugs and alcohol,
So you were aware how alcohol modified your state, but it sounds like you
Right.
weren't initially aware of that sugar was also modifying your health and your state until you went off alcohol completely, and then you leaned heavily on sugar, and you said you gained a bunch of weight, you had skin problems, acne, rosacea, these types of problems.
Yeah.
Then you started veering away from sugar, and sounds like pretty significantly getting rid of flour and caffeine at the same time. I know the struggle of doing sugar-free children. I have 2 young kids myself, and thankfully my wife is on board with it. But yeah, it's funny how family members, kind of nitpick at you. Oh, you're depriving your kids, just one candy, one this, one that, one that. But it's always kind of chipping away at the word you used is resolve. And I really think that that's the best word for it, because it takes a lot of fortitude to stand up to that. It's like you're a rock in the ocean and there's just waves beating on you constantly. It's not an easy thing to do. So you wrote the book in 2018. You're saying it did well, but you didn't get the kind of feedback, given the power of the information that you were providing, that you would have liked to see. So you started this whole other side of it. Now talk a little bit about the other side of this, with the groups and the interaction with people and the coaching, and why that's important.
Yeah, no, thanks. Well, really, and this is a pretty common construct. Even if it's like heart disease or diabetes recovery or whatever, if you belong to a peer group, like people heart transplant patients or what have you, and it's in everything, this is a lot of peer-reviewed studies about this. But in the recovery from alcohol and drugs, obviously I come from an addiction recovery model, not a diet model, not a like exercise more and eat less model. I come from addiction recovery model. And when people are interacting in a peer group of people trying to do the same, they do better, right? They do. And what happens is when people start a diet, they get to a certain point, the literature, 95% of people who lose any amount of weight gain it all back in the first year. And why does that happen? It happens because they can muscle and white knuckle and willpower for 30, 60, 90 days with what every diet book says, to reduce the white stuff, right? But then a stressor comes up, or an old memory comes up, or finances or relationships, and they fall back to their old stress reliever, their old stress management system, which is sugar, has been since childhood, sugar and flour. And so if you put all these things together and understand that if you can get folks off of the detox, off of the sugar for a period of time, but then follow them up with, we had to do it online, obviously, but online meetings where they can actually interact with people, build friendships of people. Because look, here's the thing. Most of the folks who come to us, their spouse is not on board. Their kids are not on board. They're the only one in the family. Forget about their workplace or their schoolmates. No one else is understanding this struggle that they're having. And so we're tribe animals, right? We need to have other people who understand us and can help us and have been there before. So that's really the basis of our work, and how we succeed so well is because if people are willing to get out of their comfort zone and meet other folks that are doing this, then they succeed. If they try and do it alone, they end up in a society where 80% of the food products have sugar in it. There's such a social pressure. There's no stigma around. You could give this to a baby, a 1-year-old, with no moral, legal, ethical ramifications at all. And so people need to have a second tribe. And you don't have to leave your family of origin, but you do need to have a second group of people who understands what you've been going through. So that's why the peer stuff
with you, huh?
Yeah, exactly. That's why the peer stuff works. And it's common in alcohol and drug, that's where the 12-step kind of stuff and different support systems work, why they work.
It's fascinating that you're coming at it, and you're making that distinction, that you're coming at it not from a dietary model, but you're coming at it from an addiction model. So right. A lot of people, pretty much everybody has heard at this point that sugar's not good for them, but I don't think that people quite understand the leap that you're making there to go from a dietary model to a substance abuse problem. There's documented research that shows that the dopamine hit that we get from sugar consumption is not unlike what happens when we snort cocaine.
Exactly.
And the addiction level is on the plane that you're talking about. It's more of an addiction situation. So people have heard that sugar is not good for them. Nobody would make the case that you should be consuming sugar. And yet when I delved into the statistics, the World Health Organization is recommending no more than 25 grams of sugar a day. And yet average American consumption is nearly 3 times that every single day. So it's so interwoven into all these foods. And like you were mentioning, Mountain Dew and soda and drinks. And one of the most damaging things with sugar is drinking it, because you can get so much so fast. And it goes and it hits the bloodstream almost instantaneously. So you could easily make the case, metabolically speaking, that it's way more damaging to drink it than it is to eat it. But I'm wondering, what are some of the conditions that lead people to seek you out? So you have thousands of members at this point that are attending these daily meetings, and they're getting the support from this second tribe that you mentioned. But what brings them to you in the first place?
It's the same thing that brings everybody to the $78 billion diet industry. They think at the beginning that it's weight loss.
Okay.
And type 2 diabetes diagnosis or pre-diabetes or something like that. But mostly they're coming for weight loss. Mm-hmm. They're coming because every diet, like I said before, worth the paper it's printed on. It says vegetarian, vegan, that it doesn't carnivore. It doesn't matter what it says. They all say reduce the white stuff, the flour, the sugar, the rice, the potatoes, the pasta, whatever, all of them, right? And so they've tried to implement other diets, like literally the average person. We've done surveys, 7+. Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig, you know, every diet you can think of, we have what we call runaways from. And what they struggle with, they could do keto, they could do vegetarian, they could do any diet, but they always were drawn back to the sugar. So at some point in time, they realized that this was their nemesis, that this was their bugaboo. This is why they couldn't succeed at the other diets. And they'd even had some success on the other diets through willpower, through white knuckling, but that ran out and they fell back to the sugar.
Yeah.
I always tell the story of this guy who he lost 100 pounds on keto, but he had 60 more pounds to lose, and he just kept with the peanut M&Ms. He couldn't stop, right? And so when we got diving into it, he had this relationship with this woman for 12 years. And every time he fell back to those M&Ms, he had been some kind of dust up or, you know, some kind of interaction. And really, he just managed how he felt unconsciously, literally unconsciously with the M&Ms. So, you know, and you've heard this first phrase before, but genius is only pattern recognition, right? And so what I've been able to see with these thousands, now tens of thousands of people, is they have the same reasons for success and they have the same reasons for failure, right? And it all revolves around like social constructs for the most part, their family, whatever. Because left to their own devices, alone in a room with great food, they could do fine, but not so much when they have to deal in society. And so, yeah, it's a tricky thing, and it's a little counterintuitive. And I'm so happy to be on like a podcast because it takes the arc of a podcast to kind of lay the whole, I don't want to say argument, but the whole process out, the whole idea out of why the original diets didn't work.
Well, that's really why I wanted to talk to you, because nobody's going to come on here, Mike, and make the case that more sugar is good for you.
Exactly.
Right. So it's happening on that level that you're talking about, where it's almost like subconscious, like they're reaching for it to get the effect of it, but they might not even be aware of the effect that they're getting. So what you're saying is that when you work with people, you're delving into the reasons that they're reaching for it in the first place, not just saying, hey, sugar's bad for you, which is something that these people have undoubtedly heard tens or hundreds of times before.
Right. We're bringing it to their conscious level, right? Because it's a very well-known construct in the world of alcohol and drugs that if you started using drugs and alcohol at 14 or 15, you stopped growing emotionally. Very well known in treatment centers, doctors, everybody knows this, recovery, you know, whatever. But what's less known is that if you talk to someone who's recovered from food addiction or sugar addiction, that person went through the exact same recovery. And you have to think back that you started using alcohol and drugs when you were 14 or 15. You started using sugar probably in the womb, and definitely as a baby, definitely as a small child. And your parents helped. You know, when you're crying, they gave you a cookie and pointed to the TV, right? They did not like, and they weren't, it's not their fault. That's exactly how they were raised, just like me. And so it just became this system, and it's so ubiquitous and so easy to score. And yes, I know that sounds like a druggy term, but for even a child with no money can have pretty much unfettered access to sugar if they're really desiring it. Yes. And so people unconsciously have used this emotional management tool system to manage their emotions. And then when they are sugar-free and flour-free and caffeine-free, all of the sudden, life attacks them in this way that the common refrain is, I think I'm losing my mind. And they're like, I have to tell them, no, you're not losing your mind. You are, you know, you're now beginning to feel the emotions that you had put off, tamped down via your sugar use and abuse, right?
Wow. So that, I mean, that's literally what you would say to somebody who was using a drug.
Correct.
That's
correct. This is a substance use disorder recovery. Bottom line, the more I see it, and before the 20 years before I've been sober 37 years, the 20 years before I started with the sugar, I was helping drug addicts and alcoholics get sober. And we took them through the same process. Exactly.
So it's really interesting because you're talking about weight loss, and for sure that's an awesome goal. It's kind of like sugar. Everybody knows how damaging it is to be carrying excess weight or to be obese, and yet in the United States we've got like something like 71% of the population is overweight or obese. We know that it contributes to all these metabolic disorders and sets the stage for other chronic degenerative diseases. Now, my audience, Mike, is primarily interested in the resolution of chronic pain. Every once in a while, I would have patients come into the clinic, and I use this saying all the time, all roads lead to Rome, which means in my mind, I have all these different potential pathways to get this person to their goal of becoming pain-free.
Okay.
Oftentimes I'm going structural functional. Most times I am, but every once in a while I'll get that person who's so disabled that I don't have that option available to me at the start. And then in those instances, I'll take a good long look at how that person is eating. And as they do with every detoxification program available for people suffering from chronic degenerative diseases, whether it's syndrome X, metabolic syndromes, type 2 diabetes, resolving cardiovascular disease, or even certain forms of cancer, the first thing that they do is a detoxification protocol. Let's stop putting the substances into your body that we know are harmful to your health status. And sugar is darn near the top of the list on every one of those lists.
Gotta be right.
In my clinic, what we would do with those patients who the structural functional wasn't an option initially is we would go dietary, and we would go exactly the same route that you're using, which is let's decrease the stressors that are coming into your system. And it was amazing to watch pain levels in these people chop down as a result of just making dietary changes.
Oh, absolutely. The list, when we do our surveys after people are recovering or whatever, and they've lost a bunch of weight, you would think that the first thing that they would be happy about would be their weight loss, right? Or putting type 2 diabetes in remission. But the number one, first of all, is the brain clarity. But number two is hands, knees, like rheumatoid arthritis just disappears. Like pain in their joints just disappears, okay, all the time. I had to tell this one story, and then this has happened more than once, but this woman had already had one knee operation replacement, and she was scheduled for the second one, 45 days. I said, give me 90 days. Just give me 90 days. 90 days later, she never had the operation. 18 months later, she still hasn't had the operation, and she's not going to have the operation because it literally destroys the uric acid deposits in the joint, all your joints, destroys it. The sugar's byproduct, which is uric acid, destroys your joints. So it really is a whole body toxin. You know what I mean? Yeah. And the science, I've interviewed, on events like this, over 400 scientists, and it's almost like a unifying theory is coming together for us, because each one of these guys are in their own silos to kind of studying sugar, right? They're studying in anonymity, right? They're not really out there in the public. And so we've kind of brought them out to the public, and each one of them says pretty much the same thing. And then it starts to overlap, It's brain, it's joints, it's diabetes, it's heart disease, it's Alzheimer's. I mean, it's like, it's all, like you say, all roads lead to Rome. I'm starting to believe all roads lead to sugar. So,
well, I mean, it is amazing. Like it's like dropping a toxin, a little drop of motor oil into a swimming pool. Like it's going to get into every molecule in that swimming pool. So it's the same thing when you're putting substances in the body that harm the health status of the body. It's going to be distributed amongst every system. Now, I don't know if I told you this, but when I was a little kid, my parents discovered super early on that I had a sugar and a dairy allergy. And they discovered it because my body started making these deposits. And I had this huge lump, like the size of a golf ball, sticking out of the side of my neck.
Right.
My parents were freaked out. They didn't know what was going on. They took me to doctor after doctor after doctor. They stuck a needle in it. They drained it, came back the next day. Eventually, I went to a surgeon and had this thing cut out. I could show you the scar here on the side of my neck. It kind of grew down to here. But after it was cut out, Mike, it started coming back again.
Yeah.
So my parents took me to see a practitioner who had a different mindset, and he started going like, look at the dark circles under this kid's eyes. What is he eating? I got an idea. Let's cut out dairy and sugar for 6 or 8 weeks, and let's see how he responds. Lump in my neck went away. Dark circles under my eyes went away. I had more energy. I slept better, less behavioral problems in school. I mean, all of this stuff as a result of 6 weeks of eliminating what you're saying, the white stuff, sugar and dairy. It was that simple. So we had all these medical marvels, and they couldn't figure it out. My parents took me to this local chiropractor, and he goes, what's this kid eating? And it was at that time that my family completely, it wasn't just me. Now, I was the beneficiary of a family who changed their system, so we didn't have to go it alone like it sounds like a lot of your members do. But you're talking about rheumatoid arthritis. I saw an amazing study that was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition in 2014. Big study, long term. It went on from like 1980 through 2008. And thousands of subjects in this study that they were looking at. And they found that people who consumed 1 sugary soda per month or more had a 63% increased risk for developing rheumatoid arthritis compared to people who drank less than 1 sugary soda per month. And I was blown away. I said, this information, every rheumatoid arthritis sufferer, every inflammatory arthritis sufferer needs to know this information.
Wow, I'd love this. That's a great one. And I believe it. I really do, because the hands and knees thing kind of blows me away, right? Sure. And because when I started, I thought it was weight loss as well, but people kept talking about this. My hands don't hurt, my knees don't, or whatever. So
and I've seen it with lower back and feet as well, or one of the
lower back.
Lower back all the time. With those patients where I don't have that initial way in through structural functional stuff, I'll go, remove dairy, remove sugar. Let's just clean the system out a little bit, decrease stress load on the body. I get decreased hands, feet, lower back pain, knees, hips, generally speaking, 4 to 6 weeks, these people report a very significant difference. And then when I saw this study from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, I'll send it to you afterwards so that you have access to it and you can share it.
I'd like that. That'd be great.
But you're saying that from what you've seen, and you have tens of thousands of members at this point?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what you're seeing with your large member base is the total remission of rheumatoid arthritis with making some simple dietary changes.
Absolutely. I stole it, but I used the word paper tiger because it's almost with 100% certainty.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine that would carry over to other inflammatory forms of arthritis as well. And
every autoimmune you can think of, from lupus to all of them.
Yeah. And so I have some people in my community who are struggling with autoimmune conditions like ankylosing spondylitis, which is an inflammatory type condition. It's also known as bamboo spine, where the spine actually fuses one segment at a time and it just becomes a straight rod. Extremely disabling, and that's one of those conditions where I'm working structural functional and I'm going dietary like right off the bat with these people to combat the environment that's going on inside of their body that's leading to this situation in the first place. So it's incredibly powerful to hear you report these kind of results with such a large member base.
Yeah, no, it's we're trying to get some grad students in to, quantify this a little bit better. But yeah, I mean, just from listening to folks, and we do surveys, but they're, not real super like double blind or anything. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing, really, really super.
And so you mentioned, Mike, that you have all these different experts that are studying sugar in isolation. They're saying, how does sugar relate to this system and how does it affect this disease, like this study from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that was relating it specifically to rheumatoid arthritis. But it really takes the crossover that you were talking about, where the experts get to communicate with one another and you synthesize all of that information into one place. And so for the last 10 years, you've been putting on this Quit Sugar Summit every year, where you bring all of these experts together to talk about what they're discovering, and your audience gets to benefit from having it all in one place. So that's happening in January, isn't it?
January 16th. Yeah, we have 50 speakers at least, maybe even 60. We're trying to get a couple more landed, but exactly what you just said. We had by listening to the folks, and it's totally free. You just got to give us the email and we'll tell you who's speaking each day. But you hear them, you start to hear the combination of their research together, and you start to get a little scared, to be honest with you, about what the sugar is doing to you and your children and your family. So it's really interesting. I mean, super interesting. And honestly, in the last 3 to 5 years, the information has just exploded even more. Like there's more I guess there's more funding or whatever. So there's more people talking about it, more people researching it. And it's, I don't want to say underground, but it's not getting out to the public. So that's what the summit's all about.
Okay. And I'm going to put a link for that summit in the description below the video. So for the people who are interested in getting more information about what sugar is doing to their bodies and to the bodies of their children and their loved ones, they can sign up and get all the information. Like you said, 100% free, 50 plus experts talking about what sugar does to the body. Hopefully it goes beyond fear. That's my hope. My thinking in all of this is that people reach for the sugar, like you're saying, it's like subconscious, but I think that people don't fully grasp the harm that it does. And that's why I wanted to bring forward at least that one example from rheumatoid arthritis, and that massive increase in this incredibly debilitating condition from one sugary soda or more per month. I mean, it's a huge difference in the risk with a very small increase in the amount of sugar. So that's how damaging this substance is. And I really want to thank you so much for coming on to talk about it.
No, thank you for having me. And one thing I did want to point out is that there's a lot of folks that have the solution as well. A lot of coaches and addiction experts that have the solutions, not just the research to scare you. So there's a lot of good stuff there.
Well, yeah, that's the point, is that it can go beyond fear and transfer into understanding, so that they make the conscious choice like you did for yourself and your family, which I think is,
and they can actually do it for themselves. You know, they can actually make a change, make a transformation that works for them. And there's different ways to choose from. You know, there's different ways to the top of the mountain. So,
yeah,
you know, we try and cover them all for folks.
All roads lead to Rome.
There you go.
Thanks so much for watching. I really hope that you enjoyed this video and that you put the information to good use. To save your spot for the Quit Sugar Summit, click the link in the description down below. This is their 10th annual event, and the lineup of speakers looks absolutely awesome. So I'm sure it's going to be jam-packed with valuable information. Before you click out of here though, make sure to give the video a like and subscribe to the channel so that you're updated when the next video comes out. That's all for now. Happy New Year, everyone.